Welcome to the Lived Experience Healing Show with your hosts, Corey Preston.
And Alistair Moose.
And Alistair, who the fuck are you?
I've been running a company called Moose Anger Management for the last 30 years and run a lot of groups, both anger management groups and trauma groups, and lead a team of 10 people and see individuals, couples all over the world, primarily online. And I keep on learning because I come from a place where I needed to learn a lot. The role models that I had growing up were somewhat less than ideal as far as anger management and other things. Not that I'm here to blame them, but I had a lot to learn, and I enjoy that. And I enjoy these conversations I have with Corey too. So who the fuck are you?
So my story, I'll get really brief with this, but I'll get into it, as the show progresses. I came off the streets 8 years ago. I was homeless in Calgary downtown. And before that, I escaped drug trafficking world where I was almost killed. And I owed a lot of money to a lot of bad people, and I burned my life to the ground. And essentially, I came from a world of trauma, a lot of childhood pain. I was bullied ruthlessly as a kid for about 7 years from elementary to high school. And, that made me suicidal, low self-worth, really hated who I was, hated my life, isolated away from connection. I suppressed my rage for so many years, and it was pointed inward, hating myself. And I was very dislodged from society and relationships. But as things progressed, what happened is I actually started becoming highly aggressive. I had a boil over effect that the rage couldn't be suppressed anymore. And it shot out of me. And I wanted to hurt the world. I started becoming narcissistic. I became violent. I hurt many of my relationships. I burned my life to the ground. I lost my family. I would go through cycles of friends every year because of self-sabotage and just making significant mistakes. And what happened is when I got off the streets 8 years ago, I actually got picked up by the court systems with BC Corrections, and they afforded me a psychologist, which actually saved my life. I had court-mandated therapy, and it was dialectical therapy, DBT, and it was actually life-changing. I had no idea that there was a dual reality where there's not just fatalistic ways of looking at things. There's actually peace, there is joy, there is love. All of these things felt like a lie to me until I started healing and doing that work. And from that point on, 8 years ago, I went on a very deep healing journey where I learned so much about myself, and I turned so many stones over different types of therapies, different types of alternative therapies. And I became obsessed with healing. After 3 suicide attempts, I realized that I had to fucking do something. If I didn't show up for myself, I was going to die. And I got sick of hurting so many people because the shame that I carried in my soul was so overbearing that I could barely breathe. I felt like 1,000 pounds of pressure was on my chest and my throat, and I couldn't fucking breathe. And that inspired me to create Mental Health Simplified 5 years ago. And I became a healer. I started working in peer support. I started training in mental health, and then eventually working as a mental health coach. And we have counselors, we have coaches on our team, and we serve a population of 10,000 people in a community. It's called the Healing Community. You can find it on Facebook. And yeah, that's the long-winded answer of why I'm here and what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting story, and I think everybody that works in this industry has a story behind them. And the people that dive deep into the work like you do are better able to actually help people because they've really worked on themselves and continue to,
It,
which is true for me. I keep on working on things because it's not like you're a finished product at any point.
the thing is, like, the reason I feel that I got pulled towards mental health was purely survival, because I had this monster inside my mind that wanted to destroy me. And I had this anti-self personality that I would try to move ahead in life, and I would sabotage all of my progress and burn everything down.
Yeah.
And I was constantly grieving all the time of the loss of family and friends. It was so isolating that I needed to learn everything I could. I read hundreds of books. I studied, I trained. I just wanted to feel better, and I wanted to not hurt people anymore, because my heart never wanted me to do those things. But when you go through so much trauma and you don't heal, the pain becomes a cancer, and it takes over your personality. It takes over every element of your life. And I had to fucking do something to change that, because I'm not that person.
Yeah. I think most people can relate to that. When most people phone the anger management guy, they're feeling shame because they've acted in a way that isn't true to who they are. They've reacted outwardly. They've yelled or screamed or broken things or become physical, or they've just shut everything down and frozen, or they just took off, or they were overly nice to the person that just harmed them. One of those four usually, or some combination of them. And then people, it's certainly in my family history, just never spoke about it again. That was one of the things that really moved me, was that nobody talked about anything. I mean, literally, my mom suddenly died in 1979 when I was 18 years old. And
Wow.
she had an aneurysm, literally walking along the street, fell over. That was it. Never saw her again. And my dad didn't talk about it, and he didn't have a funeral. And at 18 years old, it was like I had nobody. I mean, I had a couple of brothers that also didn't talk about it, but I knew that was wrong. And I had learned not to talk about it, so I didn't talk about it. Well, after about 10 years or so, I started to talk about it. But that was 10 years where I was sort of in a fog the whole time. And eventually I found some mentors and people that I could look up to. And somehow I got a degree in psychology along the way. Really, I don't know how. It took me like 7 years, getting kicked out of UBC, but that's another story. But the longer I've gone down this path, the better it has become. And, now 63 years old here, it's like, yeah, I'm still into learning and growing, and it's exciting. It leaves me more in charge and more in charge of myself, and more connected with myself, and I have more ability to connect with other people, like you, Corey.
What did it feel like, just going back to not having the funeral? You lost your mother, and then everybody just puts it underneath the rug like it didn't happen. Were you aware that that wasn't right? Or did you just go with the flow and just kind of adapt to the situation?
Well, I think there was multi-generations of people just not talking about things. Like my dad grew up in Holland, and he was in Holland during the Nazi occupation, and his dad was imprisoned because he was in the military. He was an officer, and they just never talked about it. And other things happened where just nobody talked about it. So there's generations of silence. And so even if I knew at some level that I needed to talk about it, that it was healthy to talk about it, it was like in my body, this thing just stopped me. Like, you just don't bring things like that up. And so I didn't for many years. And that was in the 80s where, I spent the 80s bartending and managing bars and, doing things like hiring Coke dealers for bartenders, which seemed like a good idea at the time. But, when I reflect back, that I needed to get away from that to really heal. I was not going to heal in that kind of scenario, although I did have a lot of fun. I had, I was pretty irresponsible and, things like that. And after that, I recognized, okay, I need to move in a different direction, which is what I've been doing ever since.
Was that your turning point?
Yeah, at some level, I think there's lots of turning points. I think, but one of them was I have to stop bartending and get a job in the field that I've trained for and that I know is more, more who I am. And for some reason, in when I was in high school, I knew I should do this. This is the only thing that made any sense to me. And so part of me knew, but I had no guidance. It's like my dad wasn't really one of those people that you talk to about these things. He was just off doing his own stuff. So it's like my mom was the one who I talked to about anything, and even her, not that much. So coming from a family where nobody talked about anything, we just, that was the norm.
Yeah.
And like you said, it leaves you feeling very alone. And so I have this deep appreciation when people call us up, when people access counseling or things like that. Like, I know it takes courage because it took a lot of courage for me to open up. And that's where the growth is, where it becomes challenging, where part of you wants to hold back, but it's like, no, I got to do this. It's not really going to be the end of the world if I say this stuff out loud. Sometimes you only find that out after you've said it out loud with the right person at the right time for the right reasons, with somebody who's trustworthy. Whereas when I was younger, I would open up to the wrong people, and that did not work at all, or only connect with my brothers when we're drinking, or like that's not healing, not really.
It's coping, it's surviving. You're just trying to keep your head above the water, and you honestly don't know what the fuck is going on. You have no idea. You have no awareness. At least I didn't have any awareness. I was completely unconscious to why I was doing the things that I was doing, or being around people that are selling drugs, or staying up for fucking 48 hours doing cocaine in a hotel. That was just a normal thing. And it was a better life for me than it was getting bullied as a kid, where I was the victim of perpetrators of abuse. Yeah. I was on the other side hanging out with sociopaths and narcissists, joking about beating their fucking wives. And that was just a normal conversation. And I was surrounded by these demons because I fucking felt that way too. Right? And, going back to turning point, my turning point, I was laying on a fucking floor in a jail cell, and I just burned my entire life down to the ground. I lost my family. I lost everybody, my partner, my animal, my home, my vehicle, everything. And I literally visualized myself smashing my fucking head off of a toilet. But when I saw that, I wanted to take the action, and I got up and I felt my body almost being possessed, like it was on a trajectory that I couldn't stop. And that moment something changed inside of me. There was an awareness that there was not before.
Well, that vision must have kind of horrified you.
It felt terrifying and peaceful at the same time, because I had a dagger in my stomach, and the amount of pain, like I felt like I was on fire. Like I felt like I was on fucking fire, and my stomach was turned inside out. And it was, one of the worst experiences I've ever gone through in my life, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Because
I woke up. Finally I had conscious awareness that what I was doing wasn't right. What I was doing to other people, what I was doing to myself, the shame could no longer be compartmentalized. It was in front of me, and I had to look at it, and I had to feel it, and I had to accept it. And when I did that, everything changed. I no longer wanted to party at that moment. I no longer wanted to hang out with certain people. I remember my buddy handing me a beer literally the day after, saying, "Hey buddy, let's go get fucked up." And I gave it back to him. I opened it and I gave it back to him and said no. And I fucking something switched on. And I was like, I need to change. I need to do something different. And I started with fitness, and I started listening to audiobooks, and I just became obsessed with personal development and healing. It was already in the background a little bit before. There was like a little seed there, but this just brought the light to it. And I even remember just a couple days after that incident that I just talked about, I was in a very bad place, and I listened to The Untethered Soul, which is like an 8-hour book from Michael A. Singer. And I was crying the whole time with my eyes closed in a hotel, listening to that book. And like when the thoughts in my mind were attacking me, wanting me to hurt myself or, just be very brutal inside, I could put that audiobook on, and it would feed love. It would feed positive thoughts. And that's what in my mind, it made sense. If these thoughts in my brain aren't working, go put an audiobook on and just keep learning and reading and doing as much as you can. And it paid off.
Well, it's interesting. It ends up sounding like that switch that sort of happened was you connecting with your heart.
Yeah.
Like you recognizing this isn't me. And somehow your heart cracked open enough that some love started to be like, because I know Corey is this loving guy who's got this big heart. And at that point, it must have just been suppressed. And for whatever reason, that moment, it opened up, and you started to figure out ways to keep it open, or at least when it was safe to do so. But like listening to the audiobook, that helped it. Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And so many people have those moments. I think all of us have those moments in one way or another where we go through something incredibly difficult. Yours is like big, right? I mean, but we all have those dark night of the soul, or however you want to call it. And we have to allow ourselves to feel that pain. Because in that moment, I just imagine you allowed it to really hit home, and it was like, that's not who I am. And so you open up, and this is like such a foundational part of being human. We all have this potential in us. It's just many people don't. Many people avoid pain. They won't allow themselves to experience those really difficult things. They distract themselves with alcohol or drugs or video games or porn or whatever it might be. And if you don't allow yourself to feel that stuff, then you can't heal. Then you don't have access to the joy and the love. And it sounds to me like it really hit really deeply with you in that moment. And I appreciate that.
I was a really sweet kid up to the age of 9 years old. I was like, I wanted to be a film director. I would organize all my buddies and like get a shitty camcorder and make war movies and, you know, make Lego movies, like, you know, stop motion movies, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was really creative, and I played a lot. I had a lot of friends. I grew up in a military base, many bases across Canada. And, you know, as my father was out serving, you know, me and my friends would go out in the wilderness and go fuck around and play and have imagination and creativity. And so like that was my resource. And then when I moved to Hamilton, Ontario, which is like the Detroit of fucking Canada, basically, that all changed because I was never subjected to, you know, gangs and drugs and domestic violence. And I went from being in a safe place to government housing. And my dad was a superintendent. As his first job out of the military, he's evicting some of the families that I was living with, and they fucking hated me for that. Of course, they hated my family. They abused my dad and my mom significantly. And that changed me, man. All that abuse, all of the physical violence, the emotional, just not being able to sleep, you know, like just terrified.
When you were, you know, up to 9 years old, you were able to be yourself.
Yeah.
You were like, there was emotional and physical safety.
Yeah.
Which is what we all need. I mean, as adults too, for that matter, but like especially for kids because they're so much more vulnerable. And so you developed that heart, and like that's just like traumatizing when all of a sudden that just changes.
You know, I remember this imprint in my mind of being at Christmas, and it was when we were in the government housing, and there was all these little kids and families around, all these immigrant families, and we all got one present. That was it. That's all we could afford, right? Because my parents didn't have any money. And I just remember, like, what the fuck happened? Like, we didn't used to be like this.
Well, and that's the thing, when you're little, bad things happen. It becomes about you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I'm bad. Just like when things go really well, it's like, awesome. I'm brilliant, right? When things are going well, that's what goes on internally. And, you know, you and I have both had those experiences where you're young and things all of a sudden go badly, and nobody guides you, right? It's like you can go through those experiences if you have somebody help you make sense of it so that you don't make it about yourself, and that you're still seen and heard and loved and valued and have that emotional and physical safety, or as much as is possible given the circumstances. But you didn't have that. And, you know, when I was 4 years old and living in South America, okay, with my parents, I was 4. And all of a sudden, my dad took me and my older brother, and we flew in 1965 to Holland, where he left us with family, but people I had never met before. And the way my dad was, he would have been having a smoke and a drink and just, you know, acting like everything was totally fine because that's what he was really good at. And then he just left us there for 6 months. And, you know, there was no Skype, right? It was just like, you're just there as a kid and you're like, I don't know what I did wrong, but
Yeah.
Clearly there's something really bad. And for me, I opened up with my aunt, who was really beautiful, lovely woman, big heart. But my older brother didn't. She told me later on that he didn't. And, when we got back and, my parents had moved to Vancouver, then, my dad came and got us 6 months later and we went back and I could speak Dutch and everything by then. But he never spoke Dutch to me ever. And, I just forgot all of that. And nobody ever spoke about it. It wasn't until I was in my 20s and a guinea pig in a psychology experiment up at SFU. And they asked you about your history. And I said all this stuff. And they went, wow, something pretty bad must have happened. And I could feel myself getting all pissed off at them. And after, I'm like, wow, that's really messed up. Who the hell sends their kids to live with family for 6 months? And, and I went and talked to my dad. Oh, your mom tried to kill herself.
Holy shit. Wow.
And after your brother was born and, couldn't look after you. And so, she would have been depressed for a long time before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like when you're, and my dad was never really all that emotionally available anyway. So it's like you're a little kid, but you don't realize what's going on. All you know is it's bad, and you learn to dissociate. You learn to pretend like everything's fine when it's not, and you internalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Something's bad. I'm bad.
Yeah.
And I better not make any more mistakes, or, this could happen again after I get back. Not that I didn't make lots of mistakes, but there's this unsettled, like, I can't trust anybody ever because nobody ever spoke about it, right? All of these things can be healed, but it needs to move through us. We need to feel all of it. And if nobody ever talks about it, then nobody ever feels it, and then you can't heal. So, so it's interesting. Your dad was in the military. My Opa, my Dutch grandfather, was in the military, and your dad worked as a super in a housing complex. And my dad worked and did the same kind of thing at one point. In a number of different places. They weren't government subsidized places, but they were different places where that was his role.
Wow. And then, here we are, like energy attracts like energy. It's quite interesting. I have a question because you come from the older generation. Not that that's a bad thing at all. You're 63. I'm turning 36. So there's a bit of an age difference here, which I think is, interesting for our audience, just to kind of see two different lenses on, the culture of pushing it down. Like when you grew up, obviously you came from a family unit of suppression, but growing up, without resources and the stigma of mental health, like, was that just a common thing back then, that emotions weren't talked about, and the man up culture, shut up, don't talk about it? Was that like just the status quo back then, or is that just a judgment from today's society looking back in the past?
I think there were families that did speak about these things. There were healthy families, no matter what year you're from, where people talked to each other, where people supported each other. But, it was interesting. I grew up in Point Grey, which is none of my friends live in Point Grey anymore. My dad sold the house for $200,000 in 1980, and it sold for $7 million last year.
No shit. Wow.
But I was talking with a client, and this client saying to me, well, yeah, my dad beat the crap out of us, but that's what everybody, that happened to everybody, where I grew up. And I'm like, well, where did he grow up? About 3 blocks away from me. and it's like, it's not true. not everybody's parents, but when you experience that, it seems like that's the way everybody is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not true. There's a whole range, no matter when or where. And I think historically, you go back into certainly the 80s, 70s, 60s, even more, that, nobody would speak about these things. And my mother, in the late 40s, when she was 16, got pregnant and had a baby. And she was sent out of town to Kingston, I can only imagine, to live with nuns, where she had the baby, Nancy. Nancy popped out of the woodwork in the year 2000, like 20 years after my mom died, basically. And I talk to her regularly. So that part's good. But my mom's own sister didn't know that she got pregnant at 16. That's the kind of secrecy. And then my mother's mother hated my mom and loved her sister because her sister didn't do that. And then my mom had 3 boys and her sister had 3 girls, which is what the mom preferred. It was just like one of those, everything's all or nothing. And, like just that ultimate secrecy. My mom took that secret to the grave with her. And when Nancy contacted us, and we started talking, I was like, like one more piece of the puzzle, right?
Wow.
It's like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. Your mother hates you from the time you're a teenager when you get pregnant. Obviously not planned, or it wasn't planned anyway. Not by my mom. These things are super common. It's just that people don't talk about it. And as long as nobody talks about these things, if it happens to us, we feel like we're the only one. And like in the first session of the anger management groups, they're online, but you get 15 guys and everybody talks about what they want to get out of the group. And in that first session, and somebody will say, well, it's good to know that I'm not the only one, because they look around and see a bunch of regular guys.
No shit.
For the most part. Sometimes there's a wingnut in there, but that's okay too. And every family has these things in their history. The only families that don't have that are the ones that just never talk about it. I swear there's no families without some traumatizing events in their history.
And the problem is the word trauma, that language has such a stigma attached to it. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to people that I work with, or even just, friends and that type of thing, I say emotional pain because it's universal. People can understand that. They can relate with that. We all have gone through painful experiences. We've lost grandparents. We've gone through breakups. We've lost someone or something in our lives, and we can relate with that. And I think there's a big disconnect with understanding that all of us have childhood pain, trauma. But when you have these words, the big T word, people get really disconnected, because what do you think when you hear the word trauma, or that you have mental illness? You think you're fucking broken. You think there's something wrong with you.
I never use the word mental illness.
It's still being used to this day.
Yeah. In a
or mental health challenges, which I definitely think we have to work another thing out.
Well, there's that whole medicalization that you're broken and wrong and we're going to fix you. That's not the way it works. Your body wants to heal. I think our job is to get out of the way so that our body can heal, which includes expressing and being connected, intimately connected with what's inside us. That's part of the healing. But if you've got no experience with that, and I grew up, as said, learning to numb. Like my dad thought, and I love you, Dad. He died like 13 years ago. And, like he thought the emotions were irrelevant, that you didn't need to feel sad. Like, why feel sad? And my mom died, and then his second wife died of cancer, and then his third partner died of cancer. And I never saw him cry.
Not one time, eh?
He did tell me one time that he cried about 20 years after my mom died. My mom was a nurse, a supervisor on the burn ward at Vancouver General Hospital.
Holy shit.
And he would donate a small amount of money every year. They would call him and he would donate some money to them. And he phoned me up one day and he says, I don't know what happened, but I was on the phone. He said, I couldn't get off the phone fast enough and I just burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
So it was like he held all this grief, all this sadness in him for 2 decades, and all of a sudden something triggered it and it released. But we need to release it intentionally for the healing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he just got freaked out by it. He couldn't make sense. And at the time, I didn't fully understand it either. I mean, I understood some of it, like, you're hanging on to that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was some healing that needed to be done there. And it's kind of tragic that he didn't heal. He just repressed all this stuff. And eventually, along with a lot of smoking of cigarettes and drinking and bad diet, he ended up getting dementia. And it was like he was disconnected from, himself. And in the last decade of his life, he just disconnected more and more.
Mm-hmm.
to the point where he knew I was one of his sons. He wasn't sure which one. And then he died.
That's brutal, man. Yeah, it's just like there's this idea, not even just the older generations, even people today, because we live still very much in a culture of suppression and distractions. I mean, we got these fucking phones in front of our faces, and I am guilty of this. I am no saint. I'm on my phone constantly because I run a business. I do social media. I have to do customer service with my clients. That's just how it goes. But, there's a portion of that that's necessary. And there's another dark element where it's just like you get the ghost phone and you just want to grab it all the fucking time because it's like hijacked our minds and our bodies. And it's just always there. And it's like, even when I'm walking, I have it in my hand, always at the go, and it's fucked up, man.
Well, it's like if you go out and then you realize you left your phone at home, there's this anxiety. Yeah. It's like, It's like, oh, wait a minute, I am okay.
Yeah, man.
But the first thing is this anxiety that's just like,
like, what the fuck? Like, what do you think of this? This is an interesting topic, okay? What do you think of the fact that we got these devices which essentially solve all our problems, deliver us food, bring so much comfort and ease to us, social connection, even if it's not necessarily healthy, but it also takes away from so much time of just living and being present.
It's like a soother.
Well,
we're like little babies, right with the soother, and it takes us away from the anxiety and the pains and the fears, but it also takes us away from the real joy and depth of connection, right? It distracts us from life, and it's necessary for you and I both running businesses that we need to be connected, and we use them, but at some level it's like they use us, and it's like it feels like we need to do a reset, like on a daily or hourly basis, to check in. Okay, Do I really need to look at my phone? No, but I'm going to anyhow. Can I go to the bathroom without the phone? Yes, I can. Right? Or,
No shit. Like literally,
yeah.
like what you just said. Like, do I go to the washroom and go poop without the phone? Or like, do I have an anxiety attack and just sit there? It's like, dude, it's like a fucking life preserver in just being a human.
Yeah.
And that's not cool, man. It's like,
Well, it's not cool, but it's also, I think, one of those things where we have to have a laugh at ourselves because, like, a soother is something that, like, a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old uses. And at some level, like, I know that this thing is like the soother for me, right? It's like,
oh, for sure.
and,
man.
and that is like my inner 2-year-old is like, "Oh, I can't go to the bathroom without my phone," or if I go out for a walk and all of a sudden I realize that I don't have it with me, it's like that first moment is and at other times I'll go out into nature on purpose to get to places where there's no cell phone reception. Like I'll go way out there and it feels good because it's like, or I used to go to the float house. I'd go into a float tank and all of a sudden there's nothing that's going to happen for the next hour and you can really relax.
Yeah, for sure.
Like we need those times. But I think our society as a whole is not particularly aware as much as would be healthy about these things. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on it.
When you look at the older generations like yourself, I think
you can stop saying that anytime.
The slightly older generations like yourself, you're young. I mean, man, you're 63. You look like you're fucking 40 years old.
Yeah,
okay?
Well, thank you. I'll take.
And you do, and it's because you heal, right? And you work on yourself, and you're not doing cocaine and drinking and getting fucked up all the time, right? It's like, you can see it in your eyes and my eyes, and I say that with humility. We do the work and you can see that in our skin, our eyes, and it's a real thing. When I look at, and there's no judgments here, but like you can tell an individual that's healed compared to a person that has not, because we carry the pain inside of our body. Our biology is literally composed of trauma. And you can see it in the eyes, you can see it in the face, you can see it in posture.
Yeah.
My skin was like yellow before, and I had like resting bitch face, and I looked like I was miserable, and I wore that like a mask.
Well, I think it's such a good point that what we do with the trauma, the emotional wounding that's in our history and our family history shows up in our body, shows up in our facial expression, and in the way we carry ourselves, even in the way we heal. And I think that nobody is ever really healed. We're healing.
Mm-hmm.
And when we really take the time and effort to heal ourselves, we are also just honoring the emotional wounds of the past, and we're definitely honoring future generations. Mm-hmm. Because if we heal, it impacts everybody in our life, everybody around us in one way or another. Some of them don't like it because we start setting healthier boundaries and people get pissed off at us.
Oh, fuck yeah, man.
And it's important that people are uncomfortable, because otherwise you're just maintaining the status quo, which I've done in my family for many years. And when people actually started to get upset, it was like, I must be doing something right here, which is taking a healthy stand where you need to take a healthy stand. But all of this just is in the body, and and how we carry ourselves. And I think there's also there's this feedback loop where you can hold yourself up like better, and that has a positive impact on you. It's like this, that, makes us think differently. Whereas if we're stooped over, we think differently. Whereas if you practice frowning, and really there's these guys who, work at a university, and they were practicing, there's 42 different muscles in your face. And they were practicing making these different facial expressions. And one day it was all sad ones. And the next day, one guy said to the other, I don't know what happened, but last night I was miserable. And then that guy says, yeah, me too. So just making miserable facial expressions for a day leaves you feeling miserable. And it's not that we need to just smile and everything's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it, like, it's this feedback loop that it helps to be aware of it, and getting out into nature, doing things that inspire us has this really positive impact on our mental health, on how we feel and how we look, right? When you're excited, when you have things to look forward to, like today, when I was looking forward to having this conversation with you, I was like, oh, this is awesome, right? That made me energized. And we need those things in life. We need things to look forward to.
I just want to, come back to this point, is that, as you said, the trauma, the emotional pain, it does not leave your body, your nervous system, or your mind, right? It's very much like a virus stuck in the machine. And as much as you can suppress, compartmentalize, avoid, numb, distract, you cannot run away from the pain. The pain will always find you, And what I learned on my journey is I can be a victim of fucking circumstance, or I can be a seeker of answers. I can seek the pain, seek the discomfort, and make my life so much fucking better. My quality of life has skyrocketed the more that I care for myself and heal my trauma, and building that relationship with the pain, not fearing it anymore.
Yeah, not avoiding it.
That's probably one of the most fundamental things I ever learned, is building a relationship with my pain, because pain is synonymous with life. We're always going to be let down. We're always going to get hurt. And if we can build a relationship with pain in a way that we don't fear it, and we allow it in and feel and allow it to move through us, we can truly be happy after we get through those hardships. We can return back to the default setting of peace, joy, happiness, because that's very much the human experience. It is a multitude of different emotional experiences of joy, suffering. It's a duality in our existence.
Well, and so there's nights where I just allowed myself to sit in the discomfort. Like when I divorced my first wife, when I moved out, the first night that I moved out, I was feeling great. It was like, there was this relief. I had my own space, this little 1-bedroom apartment, and that felt really good. The second night, I was like balled up, like in fetal position on the middle of the living room of this little 1-bedroom apartment, just in tears because, I wasn't seeing my kids every day. And my kids were like 4 and 6 years old, roughly. And that was super painful. And that's memorable for me. But I needed to allow myself to feel that. And whenever I've had moments where I've allowed myself to feel all the pain, and there's been many times, then the next day, usually I feel better, because it's like I'm not carrying as much of it, right? We don't, it doesn't leave us, but I related differently to the pain. And at some level, feeling that pain honors the relationship with my kids and honors the love, and that, yeah, like it had to happen, and I had to take the courage to really feel it, but it was awful.
I mean, and that's the thing, right? It's like, it's not like this cliche thing that you got to seek your pain, you got to seek the discomfort. What it is, it's like we just have to learn how to cope as a human being, because being a human being is fucking hard. Like our
Yeah.
experiences are forged within suffering, and we either learn the lessons or we keep being stagnant and stuck. And then we get stuck in survival mode, and life becomes nothing but darkness.
Yeah.
And what else can we do in that time? We got to fucking cope with substances.
Yeah, we can drink and smoke weed and do all sorts of things, but then we just spin our wheels. Then we just stay stuck in it. And, from when things happen when you're little, you neither have like the power to fight or flee. That's why little kids are so much more vulnerable, because they don't have the power to do anything.
Mhm.
But as adults, we can be intentional with this stuff. We can allow ourselves to feel all of it, express it intentionally and wisely with the right person at the right time for the right, and get help so that this stuff actually has a chance to be expressed, right? The emotions need motion. They need to move through us. And there's so many different ways that can happen. And I think we have to do multiple different things, whether it's to do with exercise or breath work or yoga or working out at the gym or music or whatever it might be. This stuff has to have a chance to move. And when it does, then it turns into something where we gain compassion to ourselves, for ourselves, for other people. And then it turns into something beautiful that connects us with our humanity and potentially connects us with others. Whereas when we stay stuck in just criticizing and judging other people, yeah, that's not where the healing happens. That's where we're staying stuck. It works a lot better, for ourselves when we practice compassion, when we practice gratitude. And you can practice compassion and have healthy boundaries. You can be compassionate and still have people pissed off at you, right? Compassion
sure, yeah.
is powerful only when we look after ourselves.
Because it's
Right.
not selfish to like, if someone's causing you harm in your life, maybe it's your best friend, it's a family member. If somebody's causing you to suffer significantly, it's not selfish to distance yourself from that person or potentially even let go. It really is not, it's not self-serving in a way where you're narcissistic. It's literally survival. You're in an airplane. You can put the mask on and take
Yeah.
care of yourself so you can survive that crash, or you can do the latter and just keep dying inside and chipping away at who you really are and deteriorating as these relationships keep negatively influencing you.
Well, and if when we were a kid, people crossed our boundaries, then often as an adult, it's like it feels almost normal to let people cross your boundaries. But when you actually put the boundaries up, it's like you're looking after that little kid in you. Then you're taking the time to ensure that young, vulnerable, soft, open-hearted part of you is seen and heard and valued and loved, and most importantly, kept emotionally and physically safe. We can do that as an adult because we have the power to do that. Whereas when we were little, we didn't. And when we step into our power, and we maintain emotional and physical safety for ourselves, that's power. It isn't power over other people. It's just power over ourselves and not letting people abuse the shit out of us. It's like, okay, I'm not hanging out with you, right? It's like, I'm not going to spend time around people that do that.
Nope.
I'm going to minimize the amount of energy I put into it because it's like, I got way better things to do with my life. And, that's not what I want to spend my time doing, spinning my wheels.
I think, when I'm looking back at my life, it's like, I didn't know that there was another option.
Mm-hmm.
That I like not having toxic relationships. I didn't know that was an option. I thought that was like status quo, right? Because that's all I saw. I acclimatized to the environment of that. And then the more that I healed, I started having these epiphanies and understanding what boundaries are and understanding how to identify toxic people and all these different things and self-sabotage and what I learned is there's a fucking green field on the other side, and it's filled with peace. It's filled with stability, and you can actually be a very happy person, even if you went through a lot of pain. We just have to be able to create a sanctuary in our lives where we don't let assholes in. And if we have to be subjected to the asshole, we have the least amount exposure to that person as possible. And by doing this and working towards this goal, anybody watching, you can change your entire life in 6 months just by cutting the toxic people out. Because you'll no longer be influenced by people that don't give a shit about you. You'll no longer have this validation that you're worthless, that people shouldn't care for you. I think a lot of people fail to see that their environment directly influences their self-worth and their self-esteem. If you have a toxic environment filled with assholes that don't care or show up for you, you're always going to feel like shit. You're always going to feel hopeless. You're always going to feel stuck. And the very first step that I made in my life to significantly change and make a difference in my life was I had to cut those relationships out and find a sanctuary space for me to be able to start building myself again.
And it's interesting because sometimes we'll miss those people. Like we'll miss some of the times we spent with them because sometimes they're family and we're minimizing. And even though they may love us in their own way and we may love them, it doesn't do us any good if they have a toxic impact on our lives. We need to find a way to put that healthy boundary up. But there's always complexity to it. There's our family history, there's our own history, there's their family history, and there's all this big dynamic between the two. And at some bottom line, it's like, yes, I need to keep myself emotionally safe and physically safe. And it's not usually black and white, although at some level it is. It's like, okay, I need to keep that person far away from me, because I don't want to spend my life surrounded by a whole bunch of drama, somebody who makes me feel bad.
Anybody watching, I want you to understand that if you have toxic relationships in your life, it doesn't mean you're a piece of shit. All it means
you're human.
You're human and you're wounded and you didn't know any better. No one gave us a blueprint for mental health. Even in the 90s, the early 2000s, there was no mental health. It was there, but no one was really connected to it. There was a stigma. We grew up not knowing how to be a human being. And to be human, We have to be emotional. We are emotional beings. Disconnecting from emotion as an emotional human being is going to make you feel like you have a void in your soul, in your heart.
You can't have healthy relationships if you don't allow yourself to connect with the emotions that are in you. They're there for a very good reason. And there's a lot of intelligence in the emotions because they're in our body. I think mostly they're in our body. That's why we feel them. And, the pain and the fear and the joy and the love and all that stuff resonates through us. And the more we're able to be connected to all of it, then we can be connected to ourselves, then we can connect to others and have healthy relationships. And when you're really dialed into your body, it's like you feel that constriction, or you get that gut feeling, and you have more trust in it. It's not the only thing that you trust, right? You actually think it through and, think through to the future and consider the past. But there's a lot of intelligence in our body if we're able to take the time to be connected and aware of it. And I don't think people didn't used to even have those conversations. I knew a therapist who was working in the 70s, and she would recommend that people exercise, and that was like really radical. And in the 70s, that was like a really radical, out there idea that exercise would have this positive impact on your mental health.
Really?
And so things have changed a lot, obviously, and we've got a long way to go. And I think just being human, there's always going to be some people that are more open to having the conversations, the difficult conversations. And there's always going to be lots of people that won't. So, my kids grew up with me as their dad, so they are more capable of that because I talk to them a lot about things growing up.
Beautiful. Well, everybody watching, thank you so much for supporting this channel. Please subscribe and click the bell notification so you can get weekly updates on when the Lived Experience Healing Show is putting out a new juicy episode.
And send us any questions or comments, any topics that you want us to cover. We're planning weekly new events, or at least bi-weekly or something like that.
Oh, you're feeling bi-weekly there.
You never know.
I'm just fucking around.